we will see.
Question I'll put now to my guests who are joining us today. We're now joined by Dr. Gordon Adams, who is a distinguished fellow at the Quincy Institute. He's also professor emeritus at the School of International Service at the American University. He is joining us today from Brunswick in Maine. Joining us this morning from Ottawa, Ontario in Canada is Irfan Yar, who is a research fellow at the Global Counterterrorism Institute. Irfan and Gordon, good morning to you both. Irfan, tell us, what are your thoughts about this document at this time? I mean, will this be the push that will push the Kabul government, i.e. the Ghani government and the Taliban, to finally talk to each other?
The recent letter that was sent along this proposal, suggested the Biden administration is extremely frustrated with the slow and pokey intra-Afghan peace process. And therefore, it strongly urged both the Afghan and the Taliban, to come to a mutual agreement. But I agree with my colleague, he's right that it would totally depend on the Taliban and the Afghan government. But I think it's more likely that the Taliban will accept this agreement and the Afghan government, because it will, shake the status quo, especially for Amrullah Saleh and Ashraf Ghani, and they are very less likely to accept this agreement.
Okay, so let's discuss this further then, if we can then, Gordon. If we're looking at, for example, specific numbers of people on councils and commissions, I mean, I wonder do you think that there is a certain amount of overreach or possibly on the part of the Americans?
I'm not terribly surprised that the United States has tried to draft this kind of document and put it in front of the parties. And I think my colleague is right that the Afghan government is likely to be uneasy with this document because they'd rather be in place with the government they have and integrate the Taliban into that government. The likelihood of that, I think, is extremely low. Right now, the relationship of forces in Afghanistan totally favors the Taliban. Agree to it, what is going to determine the future structure of the government will be the relation of forces on the ground and not the words in any particular document.
Okay, so Irfan, I wonder, as Gordon there correctly pointed out, it is about the reality on the ground, right? It's about who is stronger at this point in time. And do you think that after all these years, the reality is that the Taliban is still very strong, as pretty much we see, and then what does that then mean for future governance in Afghanistan?
Well, again, if we refer to the letter, Anthony has strongly urged both the Taliban and Afghan government, to positively consider that. And he told the president straight from the shoulder that once the U.S. soldier leave Afghanistan, and if there is no reconciliation with the group, the security situation will deteriorate and the Taliban will most probably come to power. So it's kind of, warning in a diplomatic tone to the Afghan government that the Taliban are, coming later or soon. So obviously both, on the table and the battlefield, the Taliban are having upper hands. But despite all these things, there are certain elements within the Afghan government, I would call them the spoilers, that they do not want the Taliban to come back to power. Because if they come to power, it is very less likely that, they will achieve their own personal interests. So because of their, realistically speaking, because of their own personal ambitions, they want to keep the Taliban away from, joining the Afghan government.
The Republic of Vietnam in the south, none of which really were more than pieces of paper, right? Because once the American forces had left, the situation on the ground was what prevailed.
So, Irfan, on that point then about continuous external involvement, right, in Afghanistan, I would think that any citizen of the country would want their country's sovereignty to be preserved, and then for things to move along in a fashion where it is Afghans making decisions for Afghanistan themselves. Is that point coming even in the near future, or is that very far off right now?
Yes, absolutely. This point is very clear that Afghans want to determine their own future. And even in the proposed plan, we will see that it keeps the fundamental values and the principle of Afghanistan. For example, it says that Islam will remain the official religion of the state. It also, protect the national sovereignty and territorial integrity of Afghanistan. Of course, it also, says that the women right would be protected. But there are certain, controversies. For example, the Taliban do not accept the current constitution of Afghanistan and demand that it must be replaced by a new legal document. But for the Afghan government, this is kind of a red line. And if we, look at the second part of this proposed, this strike a very good balance between the two parties, because it takes the 2004 constitution as a base and the basic, template for the new constitution from which it will be drafted. And I think if the current Afghan leadership were in the Taliban shoes, they would understand that the Taliban demand to change the constitution is legitimate, because, no matter how good the current constitution is, no matter how, religious the current constitution is, after all, it was drafted by those who won the war. So obviously, Talibans are not going to accept this, this constitution. And again, if you look from the Taliban perspective, it is not irrational, to reject this constitution and advocate for a new one which is acceptable to both the parties. And the second controversial point, arises from the Taliban demand to dissolve and break up the current Afghan government, which Ashraf Ghani and his team has, at time rejected outrightly. And this is that any transition must be, taking place, through a democratic peace process. But I think given the situation, it's not going to work. Neither the Taliban will agree that an election is reheld and, elect a state up ahead. So
right.
it is, so until these two controversies are solved, they are not coming to an agreement.
Okay, we'll have to leave there as a final comment, but we appreciate both Gordon and Irfan for taking their time out.